My phone vibrated just as I was reviewing each slide for my speech the next morning. The hotel room in Milan was gently dim, the warm yellow light spreading across the desk in an oddly comforting way. I had grown accustomed to long business trips and the quiet that comes with age, but when my son's name lit up the screen, my heart stalled. "Mom? Clara's in labor. The doctor said it'll probably be a few more hours." Daniel's voice trembled with hope. I don't remember whether I stood up immediately or stayed seated. I only remember the warmth spreading across my chest, a feeling I hadn't had in years. I used to think a heart past 60 would finally quiet down, but hearing the words, "You're about to be a grandmother," it was as if someone reignited an old forgotten part of me. After losing my husband, I had learned to live neatly, slowly, without expecting much. But the news of a grandchild felt like a gust of wind blowing open a door that had gathered dust for more than 10 years. I looked at the keynote script, the event the organizers had spent half a year preparing, and then at the suitcase already open in the corner of the room. The decision came faster than a single breath. I would fly back to the U.S. and meet my grandchild. Sooner or later, I had to be there. The plane landed at Newark close to noon. I rented a small car and drove straight to Ridgewood. The familiar road with spring trees still holding a trace of the cold wind made me feel like I was driving toward a new chapter in my life. I had spent the whole night in Milan choosing gifts for my first grandchild, a tiny silver bracelet and a soft wool blanket that I kept touching over and over. When I arrived at Daniel's door, my heart was full of excitement. I was about to knock when the door opened. Daniel stood there. His face was thinner, and there was something wrong in his eyes. "Mom," he whispered, "let me see the baby." I stepped past Daniel and almost instantly sensed the strange silence filling the house. No newborn cries, no crib, no smell of milk. Only Clara was standing in the living room, her fingers intertwined, her face pale. "Where's the baby?" I asked. Daniel didn't respond right away. He looked at Clara as if waiting for her to nod before saying anything. My chest tightened. "Mom, Mira, the baby, we gave her away." Each word fell like a stone. I froze. "Gave her away? Why? She was just born. A few hours ago you called me." Clara swallowed, her voice fragile like glass. "The doctor said Mira was born deaf." My family, Daniel's parents, they wouldn't accept it. They said it didn't fit with our family's traditions. Daniel stepped in, his voice cracking. "We didn't know what to do. They pressured us. They said a deaf child would ruin our future, and we completed a closed adoption. All the paperwork, it's already done." I could barely breathe. "I want to know where she is." Daniel shook his head. "Mom, the lawyer said you have no right to pursue anything. The records are sealed. We made sure no one could ever find Mira." The room spun around me. In the heavy silence, one truth settled sharply. My world had collapsed in a matter of sentences. I drove away from Daniel's house, barely able to see the road. The streetlights stretched into long streaks of light, blurred by the burning in my eyes. I stopped at a highway motel, the kind only the lost or exhausted ever enter. The room was small, with pale yellow walls and a stiff single bed, but it was all I could manage at that moment. I sat on the edge of the bed, covering my face. No voice, no tears at first, only the sensation that someone had drained every bit of air from my lungs. When the tears finally came, they hit so hard I had to bend over. In that moment, I remembered something I always kept in my suitcase. The last letter my husband, Michael, wrote before he died many years ago. I opened my bag, searched for it, and the small worn envelope lay in my hand. "Lydia, if one day your life ever feels too quiet, remember that family isn't something we're born to have, but something we choose to hold on to. And if you've chosen, then hold on with all your heart." I read that line again and again, and something slowly opened inside me. I could lose everything, But I could not allow a child to be abandoned because she was deaf. I could not let Mira grow up believing she wasn't worth keeping. That very night, I opened my laptop. Long-term rentals in Ridgewood, private investigators in the area, basic ASL classes at the town library. By the time I closed the laptop, the clock was nearly 3 a.m. Exhausted, drained, yet for the first time, there was a clear flame inside me. I would find Mira, no matter how long it took, no matter the cost. I moved into a small apartment on a hilly street near downtown Ridgewood. Every morning I folded my blanket, made a little tea, and reminded myself, today is one more step toward Mira. But that reminder wasn't enough to quiet the sense of being lost when I walked into the ASL class at the town library. There were about 10 people in the class. I was the oldest. When the instructor, a deaf woman named Carla, walked in, everyone raised their hands to greet her. I clumsily followed, my hands shaking so much they hit each other. The first signs I learned looked like complicated choreography, and my hands refused to cooperate. I noticed a few younger students glancing at me, partly with sympathy, partly with embarrassment for me. The deaf students kept their distance, polite but cautious. They had grown used to hearing people who came and quit halfway. I didn't blame them. I understood. One summer morning, I visited an adoption center in the area to request information. The staff member looked at the documents I brought and shook her head before I had a chance to finish explaining. You have no right to access anything related to a closed adoption, not even the name of the agency. The way she said it, cold, blunt, left me numb. But I still bowed, thanked her, and walked out in silence. The first private investigator I hired was from New York. He worked exactly 6 weeks, then sent me a short text. Nothing found. All paths are blocked. No comfort, no explanation, just a period. I sat in my car for a long time, my hands on the steering wheel, feeling nothing. Even family members began saying things I didn't want to hear. Lydia, you're getting old. Mira might be somewhere better now. Stop trying, it's hurting you. A relative said that over dinner. I only smiled, though something inside me tightened. Then one evening, as I was practicing signs in front of the mirror, an email notification popped up. An invitation to return to a senior management position in Edinburgh, the prestigious job I had devoted my life to. I looked at the screen. Then I looked at my hands in the mirror. One path offered stability, reputation, and familiarity. The other had no end in sight. I closed the email without replying. Deep down, I already knew Mira was the choice I had to protect. The second year in Ridgewood began with a slight hope and ended with a familiar silence. I hired the second private investigator, a young woman who was sharp, intelligent, and far more articulate than the first. She promised she would dig into the pathways agencies usually hide. I believed her. I truly wanted to believe. 3 months passed, then 6. Finally, she sat across from me in a little cafe at the end of the street and placed a thin folder on the table. I'm sorry, Mrs. Lydia. These types of files, they're sealed very tightly. There's no legal loophole strong enough to uncover them. If you had more information about the birth date or hospital, I might be able to trace something. But with what you have, I'm afraid I can't. I smiled and thanked her, as always, in a polite manner. But when I got home, I sat on the living room chair and let my heart empty out a little more. I had grown used to emptiness, but emptiness born from lost hope still carries its own kind of ache. One autumn evening, I met Rena in the advanced ASL class. She was a deaf instructor, sharp-featured with a smile warm like lamplight. Rena was sparing with words, or perhaps her signing was simply too fast for me to follow. But gradually, she noticed my persistence. I was the only one in the class who had never missed a single session. One day after class, Rena signed to me. "Who are you learning for?" I answered in ASL, slow but steady, for a child who has never heard someone tell her she is loved. Rena looked at me for a long time. Her eyes were no longer cautious. The next day, she texted, I'll ask around in my network. Someone might remember a kid who was transferred between centers multiple times. It felt as if someone had lit a tiny candle in the long darkness of the past years. In the evenings, I often stood in front of the wall where I kept a large map. Dozens of red pins marked states: New York, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Connecticut. Each pin is a place where Mira might have once been. Some pins I had to pull out because the leads were wrong. Some remained nagging like unanswered questions. Sometimes, in the late quiet hours, I thought of Michael, my husband. I remembered him reading in the living room at night, the warm light falling across his calm, smiling face. That gentle man always believed, family is the part we build, not the part we're handed. If he were alive, he would probably sit beside me, point at the map and say, "Keep going, Lydia. She's out there waiting." And so I kept going. Nearly 6 years had passed since the day I placed the first red pin on my map. 6 years of letters, records, classes, endless car rides, and hopes that rose and crumbled over and over. I had learned how to stand up after each failure, but a part of me had begun to accept that perhaps I would never find Mira. Then, one April morning, as I was folding clothes for my ASL class, the phone rang. An unfamiliar number from Virginia. "Is this Mrs. Lydia Warren?" A young woman's voice, gentle but cautious. "This is Melissa, a social worker at Wilmont Youth Home. I received information from a deaf teacher in Hartford saying you're searching for a missing granddaughter." My heart pounded so hard I had to grip the edge of the table. "I can't promise anything," Melissa continued, "but we're caring for a 12-year-old girl born deaf. Her current name is Mira, and her file has a few details I think you'd want to know." Mira. The name dropped straight into my chest like a bell. I tried to keep my voice steady. "May I meet her?" "Of course, but you should prepare yourself. This might be right, or it might just be a coincidence." I didn't need to think. "Send me the address. I'll be on my way immediately." I packed my suitcase in 5 minutes, pulled the map off the wall, and added a blue pin to Wilmont, Virginia. For the first time in years, I felt I was getting closer, not just in hope, but in my heart. When I arrived at Wilmont Youth Home, it was late afternoon. The sun was low, casting a soft golden slant across the playground behind the building, beautiful in a way that didn't seem to belong to a place for abandoned children. A light breeze slipped through the iron fence, carrying a faint clattering sound, like the weary sigh of a place that had witnessed too many broken stories. Melissa led me around to the back. Children were climbing slides, swinging and tossing balls, but apart from everything, beneath a large tree, sat a small girl curled into herself on a faded wooden bench. Her shoulders pulled inward, hands resting on her knees, her gaze fixed on the ground as if trying to shrink small enough for no one to notice her. "That's Mira," Melissa whispered. The name tightened my chest instantly. I strolled toward her. When I was only a few steps away, Mira glanced up, saw me briefly, then looked down again as though she was used to adults looking, but never truly approaching. I sat on a bench a little distance away so she wouldn't feel threatened. Breathing softly, I raised my hands and signed, "Hello, my name is Lydia." Mira startled, literally. Her head snapped up, eyes wide, surprised, doubtful, and frightened all at once. Children in places like this rarely met adults who knew ASL, least of all an older woman like me. She signed back, slow and small, as if unsure she was doing it right. "Hello, I'm Mira." I smiled, a smile I had to steady with all my strength so it wouldn't tremble with emotion. When Mira leaned slightly, the collar of her t-shirt slid down, exposing a small patch of skin on her left shoulder. And I saw it. A birthmark, the size of a coin, shaped like a half moon. Exactly like the one Daniel had when he was little. My hands tightened on my knees. A wave of emotion surged so hard it nearly made me cry right there. But I forced myself to breathe deeply. Not yet. Not now. Not when Mira was watching me with fear mixed with the frailest trace of trust. I simply signed, "Can I sit with you a little?" Mira nodded, and we sat together in the golden afternoon light. As if the world had finally opened a door I had been searching for across 12 long years. Right after the first meeting, Melissa brought me into her small office. On the desk was a file so thin it made me shiver. Far too thin for 12 years of a child's life. "Mira's records are heavily incomplete," Melissa admitted. "She was transferred between centers twice when she was younger. Some documents were moved, others were lost during administrative changes." I flipped through each page, my hands trembling as I saw empty information fields, smudged notes, and poor quality photocopied sheets. No birth parents' names, no exact birthplace. Only one clear line. Female, estimated 5 to 6 days old upon placement, deaf. It was a stab to the heart. The court demanded more substantial evidence. "We can't unseal a closed adoption record based on suspicion," the judge said. "We need verifiable grounds." I presented everything. The estimated birth year, the timing of Daniel's phone call, the birthmark description, letters, even the notes I had kept throughout my search. But all of it was only enough to open a narrow door. DNA. If the results matched, the court would approve the request. Mira agreed to the test after Melissa explained it with simple signs. She watched me as a nurse collected the sample, her gaze not avoiding mine, but quietly observing. This strange woman who kept showing up every day with warmer eyes than most adults she had ever met. I had to wait 3 days. The longest 3 days of the 12-year journey. When the call came, I was sitting in my car in front of the Wilmot Center. Melissa stepped out, holding an envelope. The afternoon breeze was soft, but my knees were so weak I had to hold onto the steering wheel. She opened the envelope, scanned the result, and looked up. "Lydia, 99.6%. She is your biological granddaughter." I didn't hear anything else after that. All I felt was my body collapsing and rising again in the same breath. Tears streamed down, uncontrollable, hot and relentless. 12 years, more than half of my old age. And finally, I had found Mira. I brought Mira back to Edinburgh on a pale grey morning, the Scottish sky wrapped in familiar mist. My apartment sat on a slope overlooking the water of Leith. I'd lived there for years, a quiet place, and now it became Mira's first home. I began adapting the space even before she arrived, replacing the doorbell with a flashing light system, installing visual fire alarms, adjusting light positions so faces were always well lit when speaking, adding mirrors in the hallway so Mira could notice movement easily. I wanted Mira to see that this world had room for her. Not a world she had to shrink herself to fit into. But the first weeks were far from easy. Mira always avoided eye contact. When I offered food, she ate quickly, as if afraid someone would take it away. At night, she woke up repeatedly, looking around in panic, then curling into the corner of her bed. Tiny sobs, trembling ones, as if coming from wordless memories. All I could do was sit beside her and sign slowly, "You're safe. No one here will leave you." Gradually, Mira began to trust more. But then one afternoon during homework, she suddenly exploded. We were doing math. She stared at the page, then clenched her teeth. Her signing became messy, broken, and then she shoved her notebook aside. Her face flushed, her breathing quickened. I tried speaking and signing at the same time. "It's okay. We can redo it." But that only frightened her more. She was triggered, and I didn't understand why. That night, Mira's teacher called me. "Mrs. Lydia, at home you shouldn't speak and sign simultaneously. Mira used to be scolded by an old teacher for not keeping up. She's very sensitive to feeling confused. Using pure ASL will help her feel safe and respected." I went still. My efforts had unintentionally pushed her back toward her old fears. That night, I sat in front of the mirror, practicing each sign, slow, steady, and for the first time, without speaking along. I wanted Mira to feel that the world was willing to learn her language. That fall, Mira made her first friend, a curly-haired girl named Ellie, whom she met at school. They sat together in the cafeteria, sharing snacks, laughing with their hands and eyes. By winter, Mira had joined the school's artistic ASL performance group. Watching her on stage, her hands moving gracefully to tell stories over the faint vibrations under the floor, I cried. Not because she performed beautifully, but because, for the first time, she belonged somewhere. I realized, family isn't only where we come from. It's where we are healed, chosen, and loved the right way. I had assumed Daniel would never contact me again, but one spring morning, while I was making tea in the kitchen, my email chimed. Sender, Daniel Warren. I stood still for a long time before opening it. Mom, it's been many years. I know I was wrong. Clara and we adopted a boy named Evan. He's 17, well-mannered, better than we deserve. He asked about you. He wants to meet you. I hope, if you're willing, we could see each other once. I set the phone down. Every memory, the pain, the anger, all the unforgivable moments came rushing back at once. I wanted to delete the email, close every door that had ever been shattered, but I also knew an innocent young man was asking about me. When I told Mira, she stayed silent for a few seconds, then signed, "If you want to go, I'll go with you. You shouldn't face this alone." I held her hand. Her strength sometimes made me feel small. We chose to meet at a small restaurant in Ridgewood. Daniel and Clara arrived early. They looked uneasy, tired, and worn in a way I hadn't seen before. But the one who caught my attention was the young man walking behind them. "I'm Evan," he said with a smile. "It's really nice to meet you." Then Evan turned to Mira and greeted her in ASL, fluent and unexpectedly natural. Mira's eyes widened. Then she smiled back. Throughout the meal, Daniel and Clara tried to appear normal, but I noticed their clothes were no longer as fine as they had been before. Clara's wedding ring was missing, and Daniel avoided mentioning work. Something was wrong, and I knew the reason they had come to find me was certainly not just family. It was during Evan's third visit that everything began to unravel. That day was colder than usual, the Ridgewood wind sweeping hard across the backyard. Mira and Evan were sitting on the wooden bench outside, conversing in ASL. From the kitchen window, I could see Evan's shoulders trembling slightly, while Mira tilted her head, watching him intently. The kind of attention that meant something heavy was about to be said. When I stepped into the living room, Evan stood straight in front of me, his hands clenched. "Ma'am, I need to tell the truth. I can't take it anymore." I nodded, waiting for him to find the words. "Clara's grandfather is being investigated for financial fraud. All the family assets were frozen. My family lost everything. The house had to be sold. Daniel lost his job too because everything he had was thanks to Clara's family. Now they owe money everywhere." I had suspected it, but hearing Evan say it still tightened something inside me. Evan continued, his voice cracking. "They told me I had to act polite, call you Grandma, say things that would make you feel sorry for us. They said you'd help, that this was their last chance to keep the family from collapsing." He covered his face with his hands. "I hate lying to you. I hate how it feels. I wanted to come here as myself, not because someone told me to." I was about to respond when Mira stepped forward and lightly touched Evan's arm. She signed slowly, "It's not your fault." Then she turned to me, her eyes bright but steady, as if she had been waiting for this moment. She signed, "Mom, I want to tell Evan the truth." I nodded. Mira took a deep breath, then sighed. "Evan, did you know? I'm the baby they abandoned years ago." Evan froze. It was as if even the wind stopped. No, that's impossible," he stammered. But when Mira pulled down her t-shirt collar to reveal the small birthmark on her shoulder, Evan lifted his hand to his mouth, tears spilling out. My God, they left you, and they made me lie to your mother. He dropped onto the bench, shoulders shaking. Mira sat beside him, sighing softly. You're not like them. Evan looked up at me, his eyes red. I don't want to go home anymore. Can I stay here? Just for a while? Just somewhere I don't have to pretend. I placed a hand on his shoulder, signing and speaking gently. Evan, you have a home here, with us. He broke down for the first time, not hiding anything. And in that moment, I knew. My family had grown, not by blood, but by the right choices of the heart. I sent an email inviting Daniel and Clara to my house on Saturday evening. No explanations, no details. Just one sentence. We need to talk, 7 p.m. Evan stood beside me as I hit send. Are you sure? Absolutely, I said. It's time. Dinner was simple. Roasted meat, vegetables, warm toasted bread. Not to welcome them graciously, but to create a space where no one could hide behind polite formalities. Daniel and Clara arrived on time. They looked uneasy, trying to maintain a composed appearance. Evan sat next to Mira, both silent but steady. We sat down. No one touched the food. I began, Daniel, Clara, tonight we tell the truth. All of it. Daniel swallowed. Mom, we just want... I placed an envelope on the table. Evan looked at them, his voice remarkably calm. I found this in Mom's old emails. Clara went pale the moment she saw the paper inside. Her email to a lawyer 16 years ago, clearly stating, request for a closed adoption, request to block the paternal family from pursuing rights. Reason, a hearing-impaired child is not appropriate for the family standard. Daniel exhaled sharply, as if someone had stabbed him in the back. I looked at them, my voice coldly composed. This is the truth you hid. This is the child you abandoned. Mira stood up. Her hands trembled slightly, but her signing was clear and firm. You left me. I don't belong to you anymore. Clara burst into tears. Daniel stared at Mira, as if seeing her as a real person for the first time, not the stain he once tried to erase. Mira, Daniel whispered. But Mira shook her head, signing slowly, each word painful but firm. I don't need an apology. I need the truth. And the truth is, I have another family now. Evan stood, placing a hand over his chest like a vow. I choose them too. I choose a family with real love, not one that only hides things and uses people. Clara cried out, Evan, you don't understand. We were just... Evan stepped back, eyes steady. I understand perfectly. There was nothing left to say. I turned to Daniel and Clara. Please leave my home. From now on, we have no ties. You abandoned one child, and now you've lost two. Daniel lowered his head, like a man receiving his final sentence. Clara sobbed helplessly. Both walked out of the house in absolute silence. When the door closed, Mira exhaled, the kind of breath someone releases after carrying a lifetime of weight. Evan sank into a chair, his face in his hands. I placed my hands on both their backs. We did it, I said. From now on, we're a family. 3 months later, we returned to Edinburgh. Mira continued school at the Deaf Academy, joining the Sign Language Theatre Group. Evan entered university. Social work, just as he'd dreamed. The house that had once been quiet was now full of laughter, footsteps, and the peace I thought I had lost forever. I realized kindness can open the door to healing. Perseverance can lead you to what once seemed lost. And love, when it is real, can change anyone's life. If you made it to the end of this story, leave your mark wherever you're reading it. And if stories of resilience, aging, and family love speak to you, subscribe and join us for the journeys ahead.